Energy facilities across the Middle East are under attack. Saudi Arabia's Yanbu port has reportedly stopped loading oil after an Iranian drone fell on a nearby refinery. It comes after Israel attacked Iran's South Pars gas field on Wednesday, prompting Iran to retaliate by firing missiles at both Saudi Arabia and at Qatar's Laffan natural gas facility, which has reported extensive damage. So, is this the start of a war on energy infrastructure? And how serious could it get? I spoke to MEE journalist Sean Matthews to find out.
This is definitely a real escalation, and it's one of the worst case scenarios, or it's going towards one of the worst case scenarios that analysts and officials in the region have warned about, which is a war on energy. Yanbu is really key right now for bypassing the Strait of Hormuz. So, as we have reported, Saudi Arabia has a pipeline called the East-West Pipeline, which basically connects its Gulf Coast to the Red Sea. And that is basically the lifeline right now for energy coming out of the Gulf. The Saudis have been able to export about 4 million barrels per day, give or take a couple 100,000 barrels from that Yanbu refinery. So the fact that the Iranians were able to, get a drone, I see reports that it was a drone strike, a drone into that area, and basically stop Saudi exports is really concerning because again, this is basically the only route right now for Gulf oil to leave the region.
Is this kind of the next escalation ladder that Iran could seriously think about targeting these pipelines in Saudi and the UAE? And if so, what could be the potential US, Israeli, or even regional response to that from within the Gulf?
All of this started yesterday when the Israelis basically attacked South Pars. South Pars is the largest gas field in the world, natural gas field in the world. It's shared between the Iranians and the Qataris, which I don't think a lot of people know. So that attack on South Pars that the Israelis conducted, and then at a gas facility kind of onshore, that was seen as a major escalation because it was the first time that energy production facilities had been hit. So we had seen previously attacks on storage facilities, loading terminals like Fujairah, but we hadn't seen actually anyone, the Iranians or the Israelis or the Americans, attack actual production facilities. Obviously, the concern here about attacking production facilities is that even if and when this war stops, by knocking out production, that will have a lasting impact not only on the country that's hit and its ability to export oil, but global energy markets, because it will take more time for production to get back online, right? So very, very concerning, that strike. And basically what we have seen in the last 24 hours is the Iranians, imposing what they call this eye for eye, tit for tat escalation. So the Israelis hit their production facilities, so they warned the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Qataris that they were going to retaliate against them. Obviously, that's the concern that the Gulf states have, is that they're not launching these strikes, but they are being targeted in the Iranian reprisals. So the Iranians also hit. We should note Qatar's part of basically Qatar's LNG facility, which had already shut down. So the Qataris have a force majeure. They're not exporting LNG right now, but they hit basically what is the facilities connected to the Qatari part of South Pars. So that was a major escalation. And then, of course, the Iranians fired ballistic missiles at Riyadh last night when Arab and Muslim foreign ministers and diplomats were gathering to come up with a response to the war. So that was also seen as a major, major escalation. Yeah. But again, the Iranians are saying that they are responding to these Israeli attacks. Of course, that is wearing thin, I think, in the Gulf region. Yeah. And seeing kind of some of the responses from the Gulf states, a deepening frustration, the fact that they are caught in this crossfire.
Originally, the Israeli attack on Iran's gas field was reported to have been closely coordinated with the US beforehand. But then we saw in a Truth Social post from US President Trump later on in the day, him kind of distancing the US from those attacks, claiming they didn't know beforehand, saying it wouldn't happen again unless Iran did something. What do you make of that distancing afterward? Why the change? And how does the US actually feel about this escalation?
The diplomats in the region that I've spoken with, analysts, security experts, I mean, they say it would be, the possibility of the U.S. not having knowledge of the Israeli attack on Iran's portion of South Pars beforehand is almost zero to none. You can't say 100%, but almost zero to none. The coordination between the Israeli and U.S. militaries is that tight. Multiple outlets reported kind of that Trump signed off on this. And the logic that they gave was that Trump wanted to punish the Iranians for their ability to take control of the Strait of Hormuz. So he saw it fit to target or to approve the Israeli bombing, that is, of Iranian gas production facilities. We should also note just how escalatory this is from the Iranian perspective for their own domestic needs. About 75% of Iran's natural gas comes from South Pars. So, really a huge impact on Iran's, domestic economy, on the people of Iran at this wartime. But yeah, so the reporting was out there that Trump had signed off on this, that he had seen a linkage between attacking Iranian energy production and the Strait of Hormuz, which in of itself is an escalation. Again, we should note that because no energy production facilities had been attacked until now. And then Trump flip-flopped, I think, when he saw the serious Iranian response to that strike. I mean, the attack on Qatar should not be taken lightly. Qatar exports 20% of the world's LNG. Obviously, it's a very close U.S. partner. Any ability by the Iranians to take out the Qataris' LNG production capabilities, post-conflict even, is deeply disturbing. And of course, the attack on Riyadh, the fact that the Iranians were able to send ballistic missiles into Riyadh, again, when foreign ministers from Arab and Muslim countries were meeting there, that obviously caught the U.S. by surprise. And I think that the backlash from the Gulf was probably really intense for Trump to make this, this statement. But no one is really buying it that the U.S., didn't sign off or approve of this initial Israeli strike. So it's deeply escalatory. Again, I think Trump backed out also because he saw the market. So oil prices spiked. It's the price of Brent, the international benchmark, is now upwards of 110 a barrel, I think, last time I checked. So there was a clear, rise in the price of energy. Because again, the market was concerned that what is the very destabilizing war now could become even more destabilizing if we have a war on energy production. So I think the Gulf response and the markets caused Trump to basically back out. I should add that from the Iranian perspective, what the Iranians might be able to take away from this is that they have established or reestablished some kind of deterrence. Let's see if it holds. But the fact that Trump had to come out and say this. That could be seen as a win by the Iranians. The fact that they were able to hit the Gulf hard enough to get Trump to issue this statement.
On the note of that Iranian deterrence, as you mentioned, there is growing backlash and growing frustration in the Gulf. We saw those comments from the Saudi foreign minister about military options being on the table. We've also seen escalating rhetoric from the United Arab Emirates. We've also seen reports that U.S. President Trump is considering some kind of ground deployment of troops. How do you see this escalating? Do you think that Iran has successfully established deterrence, or do you think actually that these attacks could pull the Gulf countries closer toward joining the conflict more actively and even invite a more escalatory response from the U.S.?
In terms of the deterrence that I was saying is I think what the Iranians achieved was signaling that energy production, attacks on their energy production should be off the table, at least. At least that's what I'm taking away from Trump's message. The fact that the Iranians were able to elicit that kind of a statement from Trump, basically, backtracking on his approval of the strike. I think the Iranians can see that they clearly, they scared the White House, with their reprisals. In terms of broader deterrence, that's yet to be established. As you said, I think the Gulf angle is really interesting because the Gulf states, what I've noticed in my conversations with officials in the region, from multiple Gulf countries, is that there is a growing anger, a growing frustration, and they do have this pressure on them, especially at senior levels of leadership, I think, on one side, to establish their own red lines because they do not want to be seen as the punching bag for the Iranians every time the Israelis take a hit against them. There are all these kind of tactical questions that we can get into, whether the Gulf states would, be able to effectively establish deterrence against Iran, whether their entry into this conflict would make a difference to begin with. Obviously, the U.S. and the Israelis are pounding the Iranians. What could the Emirati or the Saudi Air Force add That's a real tactical question. So those are things to be addressed. In terms of where this conflict is going next, I think all eyes, as you said, about troop deployments are on the Strait of Hormuz. This is fast becoming the most embarrassing element of this conflict for the United States. We in our pieces have been speaking with analysts and experts, and many have compared this to a Suez moment for the U.S. That's obviously a reference to the 1956 crisis when colonial Britain and France joined with Israel and tried to wrest control of the Suez Canal from Egypt. They failed in that. Some parallels here with waterways, trade corridors. But the fact that the Iranians have been able to wrench control of the Strait of Hormuz is deeply embarrassing to the U.S. We should note that the Strait of Hormuz, while traffic has, come to a standstill, it is not closed. So that's why I'm saying they've wrested control of it, because we have Iranian exports still transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. And there are signs, very small signs, that the Iranians are trying to establish some kind of transit system through the strait. We've seen some vessels destined for India, two, I believe, and then one from Pakistan, exiting through the Strait of Hormuz with the Iranians' approval following negotiations. So the fact that the Iranians have, again, wrenched control of the Strait of Hormuz from the U.S., which had previously guaranteed security and passage in this waterway as the superpower, is deeply, deeply embarrassing for President Trump. And that is why we see this troop movement of U.S. Marines heading from East Asia into the Middle East. And we see all of this chatter really about, potentially deploying troops. And it is very much because of the Strait of Hormuz.
Yep, definitely a vital choke point in this conflict to watch going forward. Sean Matthews, thank you so much for speaking to us today. It has been extremely valuable to hear your analysis, as always.